I doubt that's what's gonna stay.
I'm gonna call him out on that.
Okay. You guys ready?
No.
Alright, here we go. 12 of us sat on a tree that had fallen across the river. Each of us, covered in head-to-toe camouflage and BB guns strapped across our backs. We were taking a break from playing war in the forest that was adjacent to our neighborhood. Well, I suppose it wasn't so much playing war as it was designing the most perfect of fortifications from the impending Russian invasion. See, this was the 80s, and in the 80s, there were three main threats to everyone who lived and breathed on American soil. First, that each and every last kid under the age of 12 would be the target of a kidnapping plot. I don't know what it was, but every kid was being abducted in the 80s. With the barrage of after-school specials and made-for-TV movies that were shown to us in school on a monthly basis, one would have thought that there were roving bands of black vans lurking around every corner to steal us and whisk us away to some dark and dank basement where we would be tied to a chair and gagged while our tormentors played phone tag with the police and our parents over the ransom drop spot. Truth is that after our funerals, our lower middle-class single parents would have welcomed the fact that they would no longer have to clean our dirty footprints from the aging shag carpets or worry about how they were going to raise money to buy the hot new BMX bike that we all so desperately needed to look cool. We were children of the 80s, so naturally we were greedy, regardless of income, class, or tax bracket. The second issue that plagued our communities was AIDS. Again, with the TV movies and 2020 specials, everyone was doomed to suffer a life of AIDS. There were AIDS-ridden hypodermic needles in every trash can and on every park bench and hidden deep in our mailboxes. At one point, I was actually told by a panic-ridden 5th grade teacher, "You kids will be lucky to see 50. At the rate AIDS is killing everyone, you might be the last generation on this planet." That's for real, that really happened. I thought about how awesome it would be. Me, being one of the last representatives of the entire race. I thought about the chaos and turmoil it would throw the world into. Stealing and looting and burning buildings and breaking windows. It would be awesome. I thought I was a troubled and bored kid from a broken home. And you know what troubled and bored kids from broken homes aspire to accomplish? Breaking things, looting things, burning buildings, and breaking windows. I couldn't wait for Armageddon. Which leads us to our third plague of the 80s, nuclear war. During the 80s, I saw two pivotal movies at the local movie theater that instilled the McCarthy-era Red Scare into the back of my brain. Red Dawn and Back to the Future. Now, while the story in Back to the Future focused more around time travel and the hijinks that ensued, at a young age we were intelligent enough to read between the lines and see the message our government was sending. That the Libyans wanted nothing more than to secure plutonium to make a nuclear bomb to drop down and cripple the suburbs of Chicago, thereby securing an entranceway for an impending invasion. In Red Dawn, we learned that it was a communist-backed Russian army of Afghanistan that came parachuting out of the sky to invade our land, steal our women, and take away our Ataris. They didn't attack the coast or major cities, they came right into an unsuspecting small town of Colorado. And if we took anything away from these cinematic masterpieces, it was to be prepared. If there were a low-flying helicopter, it was the evil Russians. If there was a jet in the sky that seemed to be suspicious, it was those damn commie Cubans. We wouldn't be complacent like our ex-hippie parents who sold out their ideals and chopped off their balls in lieu for a minivan and jazzercise classes. We were the new guard. Raised on Rambo and Iron Eagle and missing in action movies. We love ninjas, Cinemax After Dark movies, and playing war. And we would be damned if there was any dirty communist that would get their hands on our Def Leppard tapes. Even if I didn't have a clue what a communist government's ideals were. Shit, we figured if it wasn't good enough for the Wolverines in Red Dawn, then it wasn't good for us, goddammit. That afternoon, 12 of us sat on that fallen tree above a rushing river with a serious undercurrent that had recently taken the life of a tough 18-year-old metalhead in an Iron Maiden t-shirt. And in 1984, an Iron Maiden t-shirt made you a tough hoodlum. And if tough burnouts could be swept away and killed by a river, we knew that we had to gather as many kids in the neighborhood and test their pussy factor to see if they could hang out with us once the Russians came. We swung our feet over the edge and we joked around about each other's mothers because that's what you did when you were in 4th grade. We thought of new defense plans for the fortification of our base, which was nothing more than a torn-down wooden fence that we shoved up in a tree, which, by the way, is still there. Plans for the tiger pit trap that we began digging on a popular trail that ran uncomfortably close to our headquarters had to be scrapped due to the fact... Could somebody close that door and tell them to shut the fuck up? Where are we? Shut up! Where was I?
Tiger trap.
Tiger trap. Then we began digging on a popular trail that ran uncomfortably close to our headquarters had to be scrapped due to the fact that it's super fucking hard to dig a 6-foot hole in the ground for an adult, let alone a ragtag group of little kids armed with their mother's gardening shovels. We had new plans for a network of poison-tipped blowguns strategically hidden in bushes, even if we didn't know where to get poison to arm the darts with. We could certainly perforate the enemies with hundreds of tiny sewing needles. Then there was the ever-popular barbed wire trap, where we had planned to string barbed wire from tree to tree in a sort of maze, so that if we had to retreat, we could run through a certain pattern through the trees and our unsuspecting pursuers wouldn't have the advantage of navigating the barbed wire forest and would be ensnarled and left to bleed to death while their comrades stood by and watched helplessly. Man, that was a long sentence. In reality, the only barbed wire we could find was from a nearby abandoned farm whose limited supply of 50-year-old rusted barbed wire we effortlessly snapped off with a flick of a wrist. And the most we could have hoped for was to be chased by an army of hemophiliacs who, when scratched, would have bled to death in maybe 4 or 5 years. Yeah, we had plans, all right. We would have our own band of Wolverines. 12 kids from 3rd to 6th grade who had everything they needed to defeat an invading army of godless savages who wanted nothing more than to take away our liberty. We would be heroes. And while our parents made fun of us when we painted our faces to resemble our camouflage outfits we wore, we knew that in the back of our mind the day would come when we would be paraded through the streets of our town to a ticker tape parade and take our rightful place in the community as nobility and statesmen. We were young, but we had ideals. We knew that we had to pick up the slack for our parents on that log. Between the mom jokes and our improvised MacGyver-like booby trap planning, we were golden and untouchable. I looked over at my friend Jerry and said, "Dude, this is where that burnout kid who lived up the street fell in and died." Looking from me to the water, Jerry said, surprisingly, "No way." "Yeah," I said matter-of-factly. "And that dude was big and tough and he couldn't fight the undertow. Imagine if we fell in." Jokingly, he looked over at me and feigned like he was going to throw me in. I pretended to panic and then laughed. We sat back. I took off my Army green field pack and threw open the flap. Digging around the inside, I pulled out one of my mother's famous condiment sandwiches she packed for me. Lettuce, mustard, and American cheese on white bread. I unwrapped the sandwich, looked down at the river that glistened like gold from the overhead sun, and took a bite. I stopped chewing when I heard a faint sound. It was far away, but progressively got louder. "Dude, did you hear that?" Jerry said. "Yeah. What's that noise?" I responded. "Dude, it sounds like air raid sirens." We seemed to yell in unison. I clearly remember my eye instantaneously filling with panic-filled tears of Armageddon. I looked over to the other kids who leapt to their feet on the fallen tree and began pushing one foot in front of the other. Began putting one foot in front of another like ants on a log, making a desperate dash to safe ground. I put my hands on the log and pushed myself up to my feet and turned to run. Only there was a line of terrified and watery-eyed kids in front of me. I looked around to everyone on either side and yelled, "Run, motherfuckers, run!" We all knew what was coming. The bombs. I couldn't take it anymore. It was everyone for themselves. In my haste, I went to push Jerry out of the way and inadvertently missed my footing and slipped backwards. Slow motion. I took a deep breath and held it. I looked up at the clear blue sky and saw the sun, and then I saw black. I was underwater in the river that had recently killed a local tough-ass bully. Worst of all, I couldn't swim. In my horror, I let out all of my air trying to scream and promptly breathed in a lungful of brown and muddy water. I surfaced and screamed out like I was on fire. I could see the scatter of scared little men running and falling haphazardly through the forest. I could make out someone crying for their mother. I bobbed up and down, being held afloat by the many layers of camouflage that trapped in the air. I pushed my way through the water towards the edge while I was slowly being taken downstream. My lungs, now paralyzed by the fear of being sucked under by the impending undertow, and the fact that any help I would have were now literally peeing in their pants and sprinting through the woods back to the shelter of their own homes. This wasn't the way I was supposed to end. Heroes didn't drown while eating condiment sandwiches. This was it. I was gonna die. That was until I stretched out my legs and I could feel the mud beneath my feet. I stood straight up and the water only came up to my chest. Luckily that summer was particularly dry, thereby lowering the water level and making it possible for this lame duck of a swimmer to walk effortlessly through the rushing water to the shore. I slipped and climbed on my hands and knees up the muddy riverbank, tore off the sack, and immediately took off running in the direction of my retreating trader friends. I was fast and caught up to them in a matter of minutes. "Are we gonna die?" Kevin, the youngest of our group, asked while running and looking back over his shoulder. "Man, I don't know," I said, coughing water out of my lungs. "I heard those sirens before on that movie Threads." Threads, like its counterpart The Day After, was one of those 80s movies designed to put the fear of God into the viewer by boldly illustrating in all its gory detail the effect a blast of a nuclear bomb would have on our country. Either our skin would melt from our bones, or as a result of the fallout radiation, we could expect to die a slow, cancer-filled, agonizing death. I place the blame squarely upon these two movies for that Pavlovian response connection between the distinct warning from those sirens and an incoming missile strike. Our little legs and our lungs felt as if they were filled with Alka-Seltzer, carried us out of the forest and into a parking lot of the local strip mall. We looked up and saw a large gray speaker whining as it spun around with a wah effect. Yeah, sound effects. W-A-A-A. Cars were driving, people were walking, and the local chicken hut was still open for business sign in their window. We made a dash for an open garage of a heavy utilities rental company. Inside were two older men working on a lawnmower. Grabbing our knees and coughing and grasping for air, Kevin blurted out, "Are we at war?" The two men looked confused. The one with a silver wrench in his hand said, "Excuse me, son? Is this a nuclear war?" The man looked at his friend and began to smile. "No, son." The smile broke into a condescending chuckle. "Those are the new tornado sirens. They test them every Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. We were stunned. I turned and looked at my friends, most still panting and sprinting from uphill through the trees and bushes. Everyone's cheeks and foreheads had little red cuts from tree branches hitting their faces. A few were still sobbing, remnants of the adrenaline still working its way through their veins, and stood sopping wet with mud covering half of my camouflage body. Oh, and I looked at Jerry, he looked at me, and together we let out what might be the biggest sigh of relief either of us had known in our entire lives. Smiling, Jerry looked at me and said, "Man, you screamed like a little girl." A nervous laughter arose from the small mob. Straightening up and with a serious face, I said, "Psh, you were scared too because you thought it was a nuclear war." His eyes squinted like he wanted to fight me for calling him out. I turned and I looked at my friends, most still panting from sprinting uphill through the trees and bushes. They wore tiny red cuts along their cheeks and foreheads from the branches, and a few were still sobbing. Remnants of the... Why?
No, you read that.
Weird. Must have not copy and paste that. That day in that garage, our gang of misfits stood luminous and brilliant. Despite the sweat and the spit and the tears and the mud, it was a perfect moment. One simple yet magic day in a host of thousands where time was infinite and golden, when nothing mattered outside of friends, mayhem, and microwavable pizza rolls. That day, in that garage, despite the mud dripping from my camouflage body, I felt the magic in the air. And it was the first time when you see the kids you hang out with as more than friends. I looked back at Jerry, waited a beat, cracked a smile. "Come on, man." I put my arm around his shoulder and said, "Let's go back to my house and watch Commando."